think I'm going to start because we're going to do a bit of an extended introduction today. I would like to thank you all very much for coming along. I think it's going to be a fantastic event. Before I talk about Gretchen, just a few housekeeping rules. Please keep your video off and microphone muted. Post your questions in the chat during the talk. If there's a really essential point for clarification, you don't know what was meant by something, you don't think it's going to be clarified later, then of course we can add that. We can actually ask Gretchen online, but most of the questions we're going to keep till the end. And please be aware that this session is being recorded. Okay. So I'm really pleased and extremely honoured to be able to welcome Professor Gretchen Daily today to the LEEPout seminar. She's going to give her talk from demonstration to transformation, taking natural capital approaches to scale. Now, I am sure that many of you will be very familiar with Gretchen and her work. She is the Bing Professor of Environmental Science at Stanford University. Perhaps I would say her greatest accolade is that she was the founder of the Natural Capital Project, which has such an amazing impact right around the world. Her awards and honours are truly amazing. You can see the list, actually the edited list of awards and honours that Gretchen has received for her work. And of course, the greatest honour, she is a member of the LEEP Advisory Board, which only the very best can claim. Now, Gretchen's work centres on the question of how can natural resources be better managed for both biodiversity and people. An absolutely huge and crucial question, which has involved her addressing all aspects of the relationship between the natural environment, the services that it provides for people, the economic activity that it supports, and the well-being that is delivered through this relationship. And of course, also the feedback effect from the economy back onto natural resources and the problems that this is generating. This research is reflected through a truly incredible catalogue of publications. I just couldn't, this is the most that I could get on one page. It's absolutely sensational. Publications in the very best journals and books around the world. And the subject matter, as you can see, is extremely diverse. As I say, looking at all of those aspects, not just the relationship between the science of the environment and the economy, but also the other aspects that this leads on to, for example, poverty, mental health, human health, and of course biodiversity and its loss. I got very depressed in a way putting this slide together, because it just made me think, oh my God, I'm not really doing much for my life. This is what Gretchen has put out in this year, just in this year. Quite incredible. And of course we're not even at the end of the year yet, and I'm sure she's got loads of stuff on the stocks. So a phenomenal and exponentially growing catalogue of contributions at the very highest level. And of course, she hasn't just produced superb academic work. She's actually pioneered taking this outside of universities and actually implementing change across the world through the Natural Capital Project in particular. This has operated right around the world. amazing case studies. If you go to the website, from all continents, maybe with the exception of Antarctica, I'm not sure about that, but everything else covered. And something I particularly like is the fact that this work, which has been so path-breaking, is given away for free. So she's actually interested in changing the real world. Now, normally what I do now is hand over to Gretchen, but we've been talking for a while, and we're just going to start in a slightly unusual way, and I'm afraid in quite a sad way, actually, because we want to mark the passing of our good friend and superb academic, Georgina Mace, who passed away, sadly, just a couple of months ago. Now, Georgina is a very good comparator with Gretchen, both of them absolutely superb architects of driving forward our understanding of biodiversity and human well-being and its interactions. Her work as Professor of Biodiversity and Ecosystems at the University College London has generated enormous impact, both on the academic world and on the real world of environmental decision making. You can see the sort of areas that she's worked in. She really pioneered work on the extinction of species, from her breakthrough work on understanding why the rhinoceros was actually going to go extinct if we didn't act, and she was decades ahead of what we now know are the problems for species like that. But also in her development of the Red List, as it says, the most comprehensive inventory on the conservation status of the world's species. Again, an absolutely stellar career, celebrated through a wide variety of positions and also awards and commendations, including one that she actually shares with Gretchen, the BBA VA Foundation Frontiers Knowledge Award, and of course that other pinnacle of achievement, membership of the LEEP Advisory Board. I'm going to hand over now, and I know Gretchen wants to say a few words about Georgina as well at the start, and then she's going to carry straight on and present her talk. So welcome very much to Gretchen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes,
yes.
Fine. Great.
Okay, fabulous. Well, first off, I can't thank you enough for that really over-the-top introduction. So now I'm extremely nervous. All of that work is really thanks to so many just tremendous students and postdocs and collaborators, foremost among them at LEEP. And I'm really grateful for the chance just to talk with a bigger group of people there at Exeter. Oh, wow, I see some friends in the gallery view. That's just super nice to see some friends there, and to see some others I hope to make friends with as soon as we're able to travel around again. So thank you very much. The last time I was at LEEP, actually in 2016, in June, was a fabulous time. I got to go with Ian and Georgina to London, to the House of Commons, to help present this work, and it will stand out in my mind as just a fabulous day. And maybe I'll share my screen to start getting into things with some pictures. But yeah, I'm just a huge admirer of everything going on at Exeter broadly, and certainly at LEEP. And I leap at any chance to work together. So what I want to do today is building in a moment here on Georgina's legacy is help stimulate another conversation among us on this topic of how we can go from what we all now recognize with a lot of pride to be many demonstrations in many parts of the world, and with the UK and the National Ecosystem Assessment and so much other work being led right there where you are, making a dramatic impact and inspiring people all over the world to emulate and go further. How can we go beyond these demonstrations in time? And I have to say, at quite a personal level, it's been really quite a struggle, as I'm sure it is for many, even here in our privileged positions, to be gathering around academic goals and progress. It's been incredible just seeing the climate impacts in California, for example, this late summer and fall, with temperatures about 110 degrees here right where I'm living, and normally 100 degrees would be a real shock. And then the fires that I'm sure you read about and maybe saw on video and television and such, things like that, and the pandemic, the other changes that we've all been predicting for a long time coming on much harder and faster, and this maybe being just a taste of what's yet to come. So I want to try to build on Georgina's incredible legacy and just say how I met her. Actually, I'm going to start crying, so I have to keep myself together here. When I was finishing up my PhD, and it was amazing just seeing her decades ahead, as Ian says, is spot on in her thinking, and feeling always really inspired by her, even though we were separated by the Atlantic and didn't work that much together directly. I was always looking at what she was doing, and I mean, certainly month to month, and keeping abreast of it, and trying to always basically hoping, in looking up to her, that she would approve of the directions that that I and this wonderful team of students, postdocs, and collaborators that we were all taking. So I hope that the little presentation and our conversation after live up to her hopes and expectations as well. And what I want to do, I thought I would actually start with a little bit of a history as to where we are in the movement to try and redress the way humanity interacts with nature and thinks about, our place in nature. And Georgina had this fantastic little summary that actually triggered a lot of conversation just a few years ago, framing conservation. If you just look at those pictures on the left, initially based on some of the ideas of wilderness, we could go way back, but anyway, looking here in the West at nature for itself, kind of hoping to protect more pristine, what we thought of as pristine wilderness, though, of course, in the United States and basically everywhere else, people have been playing a major role in living in and nurturing it and stewarding wilderness from the beginning, since the earliest arrival of people in places. So that's certainly all of the national park areas in the US were lived in and stewarded by Native Americans long before Europeans arrived and started framing what we should do in response to the devastation we've brought environmentally in North America and elsewhere. Then moving to this view of nature despite people, and on into kind of a transformation, and all these views kind of hold concurrently today, but nature for people. That's a lot of what we'll be talking about, and also moving into the 2010s, teens, and beyond, people and nature. How can we integrate our view and then all of our systems basically for making decisions, for guiding progress, for informing policy, finance, and practice out on land and waters. Um, Certainly, Georgina had a huge role in our thinking about all these things, in bringing science to bear to help us see where we were and help connect with decision makers in key arenas. And all along, really advancing our strategy. And that's what I'd like to get into now. And I'll pick up with a bit of a recent history, and I'm sure there are many ways we could tell this history, and I'll just touch on a few of the heroes. One being Ken Arrow, who was a Nobel Prize winner and passed away just a couple of years ago, actually, but played a tremendous role in advancing a knowledge foundation that in the beginning was meant to integrate ecology and other natural sciences together with economics and also other social sciences, and a foundation that has become ever broader, where Ken played a key role in his credibility, his wonderful manner, and his reach across the world, working in many, many different places and having friends and admirers everywhere who wanted to learn and who were motivated to act as a result of what he was bringing on. And that in part, and also thanks to just independently many leaders out in the world recognizing the crisis, developing new approaches that aimed to turn things around. In Costa Rica, shown here is one of my absolute favorite places in the world. I've worked there for about nearly 30 years now. I can't believe it. But Costa Rica, back when I started working there, was most known for basically being the poster child of planetary destruction, having the highest deforestation rate ever recorded at a national level. And by, I don't know, by the late 90s, having launched a series of policies meant to turn that around, including the first ever country-wide payment for ecosystem services program that paid landholders a pretty small amount at one level, about $50 US per hectare per year, to maintain land in forest or restore forest. And this program continues, and Costa Rica now has a net positive reforestation rate, and a president that you'll see in a bit here who is behind continuing with that restoration of natural capital. And Costa Rica has spawned, through their example, many, many other cases. There are now about 550 payment for ecosystem service programs that are very active globally. And in transactions annually, they amount to about 40 billion US dollars per year. So it's amazing to see how charismatic leaders in charismatic places can make a tremendous difference. And what I'd like to keep asking here is what we should do next. So in cities too, in another charismatic place, New York City, there was a famous deal to protect what was then declining water quality and help restore water quality to protect the health of the 10 million or so people living and working in the city, who draw their water from a place about 100 miles to the north of the city, the Catskills Mountains, this beautiful New England area where people have long gone for holiday and summers and things, and where the city, to make a long story short, feared having to invest in a major water treatment plant, and instead, based on the experience it had had in building a small one, and working with a lot of others, realized that actually they could save a lot of money, on the order of $6 billion and about, I don't know, around 300 million a year in water treatment costs, just by investing instead in the communities that steward natural capital in the area where about 90% of the water originates. So most of the land stewards there, well over 90%, including this gentleman, David Hawley, who is a dairy producer, signed on voluntarily and have been part of a major investment. One of the investments he received was this solar warmed barn, essentially, where the health of his calves and cows is much higher than it had been in the beautiful but dank, dark New England barns. And so this story has also been a success. And as I'll show you in just a moment, very quickly, has inspired cities around the world. And in Latin America now, we have over 55 major cities, many capital cities and other major cities across Latin America, advancing a similar approach. And so I want to keep getting to this question: how can we support these efforts to scale? How can we systematize what we know and make it accessible and actionable to help advance leading individuals in key places in government and corporations and elsewhere to drive change? So with that ambition, along with others, it was actually Peter Kariva, then at the Nature Conservancy as lead or chief scientist, and Taylor Ricketts, the equivalent at World Wildlife Fund in the US. We together formed the Natural Capital Project and very quickly dragged in a whole bunch of friends. And Ian is certainly one of them. And our aim was to provide the science to systematize and then mainstream this sort of approach. So today the partnership looks something like this, with these are some of the lead partners together, working with 50 research partners and over 300 implementing partners. And the idea, I'll just show you very quickly some things and then we'll dive into some cases. But the idea is to advance science, the technology enabling us to sense what's going on planet-wide at very fine scales now, build a community of practice, build capacity in countries all over the world to inform decisions, to be able to use the approaches that we together bring forward. Excuse me, and then make possible the stewardship that many landholders already practice, and that basically all I feel would welcome practicing were it more possible economically and also sometimes culturally. So the basic concept was to, advance understanding, working together in research, researching many, many areas, well beyond the few that I've been able to dabble in. Bring what's known together in tools that would make the research really actionable, help inform economic and other decisions, and then demonstrate these working together in new ways that are beautifully illustrated by everyone at LEAP and in other parts of Exeter. Excuse me. And then, make all this, I meant to sort of highlight these as I went, but make all of the work accessible through an open source platform. And I'd say we're only, a little ways along in developing all of this, and would love to hear your thoughts when we open for conversation on how to be more impactful, more helpful, and really accelerate the way in which we're able to operate. So the idea behind all of this, just briefly, is to try and change, management and policy on the left, say by shifting to green agriculture, and provide the science that lets people know how an investment or a change in management and policy would change an ecosystem structure, say, looking at streamside habitat, change ecosystem functioning, improve water filtration and retention, change provision of services to people by, say, reducing sediment load in streams and improving agricultural yields, and then basically change outcomes for people, change benefits. So that's what's behind what we've then, as a community, all built this software system called Invest for integrated valuation of ecosystem services and trade-offs. And the aim here is to keep bringing in new models that we code up in software, that we test and refine, and then implement in projects all over the world. So in health, for example, I saw Ben Wheeler there joining. We've been developing a mental health model that I bet many of you know quite a bit about, the tremendous work that's being led at Exeter in mental health and nature, looking at both cognitive functioning as well as emotional well-being. And then there are many, many other areas here and beyond those captured in this little slide, including a bunch that now operate at the level of cities where the mental health model will first be deployed. And all of this has been tried out by at least a few wonderful grad students in countries around the world. And some countries are really taking this to scale. Most countries, I would say, have not really heard about our efforts at scale, and that's one of our challenges. But at least we're getting out there in some ways within more academic circles. So the idea is to, bust out of our monastic sort of practices that universities carry forth with very well, and bring students and people together ever more, as I know you do, having been involved in some things at Exeter, and having sort of stolen a lot of ideas from the ways in which you develop engaged work in advancing the science, and in this case also the software. We happen, thanks to a few friends in Costa Rica, to have had a visit from the new president, one of the amazing young people leading the world. He's just turned 40, I think. He might be 41 by now. And similarly with friends in China, where I've had the pleasure of working with Ian and others, had a high-level government delegation spend 2 weeks visiting at Stanford and in the US more widely, in a way that you'll see has informed some of their policy that they were already well down the track to bringing along, but it's just been tremendous working together with, in this case, the head of the Department of Development Planning, and there was also essentially, with a different name, the finance minister as part of this. And the idea is really to scale and mainstream. And I'll just touch on a few cases where things have been starting to mainstream. And what I'd love to hear from you is ideas on the barriers, basically, that remain, and there are many, for us to help lift, and what is the key role that people in academia can play in identifying and lifting those barriers together with partners. And what sequence of battles would you lay out as kind of the next to tackle together to achieve, development pathways that are green, sustainable and inclusive? So we've been working all over the world with partners in these different types of demonstrations at country or regional levels, and also now just recently more and more in cities, and often focused on things I'll touch on now: coastal climate resilience, securing fresh water for cities and for many uses beyond cities, and trying to set standards, especially in the private sector. We're least far along there, but you see the UK, I see the little dots have drifted out into the English Channel and things, but they're meant to be over the UK actually. The UK is a leading light here with the work of the Natural Capital Committee and Her Majesty's the Treasury and such. So just to mention briefly and give a little color to mainstreaming that example from New York, we see across Latin America watersheds where the stewards upstream are often a world apart, speaking Quechua and other languages from the people downstream in cities or in agriculture and hydropower. But now new policy mechanisms being delivered at scale that involve investments in upstream communities to improve downstream, benefits. And these involve, among other things, using INVEST to determine for any catchment, such as the one shown on the left, with the stream network and a bit of forest remaining at the upper part of the catchment along the ridgeline, and then cities downstream. You see, it's basically a way of taking what New York did and putting more numbers to it to show where in these vast upper reaches of the Andes and places to invest and how much to invest to achieve desired improvements, say in water quality or in water security during the dry periods. And this is now being standardized across these water funds, about 55 in Latin America, and ever more actually in Asia and Africa, not shown so much here, involving standards in the eco-hydrology, the financing, the governance, and even some monitoring, not enough yet, but monitoring in about 12 of these funds. And perhaps most important for scaling, this is a shot of the person talking as Luis Alberto Moreno, who just stepped down after many years of tremendous leadership at the Inter-American Development Bank. He and colleagues there and across Latin America are really behind the scaling, as well as key partners in NGOs such as Mark Tursick there, who headed the Nature Conservancy during this major scaling. And the software Rios was a version we developed that greatly simplified and focused the science on the near-term decisions being made by water utility leaders across all those cities. So a second arena, and I'll mention just this one and then one other, in which these approaches are being taken up at scale, is in coastal climate resilience. So at this time of year, if you're watching the news around the Americas now, there are tremendous hurricanes going on, unfortunately. And these are expected to intensify, obviously, you know that, in frequency and severity. And the question is, how can we help build resilience and prepare before things get much, much worse? And this just shows, a zoomed in view of part of the software that indicates in red the highest hazard, and will help indicate where one can invest under Show Me and habitats to reduce coastal climate risk. And so using this software with, data streaming in through remote sensing, we can target investments that best protect people and property. And this approach now has been taken up both in, say, the Bahamas. We've worked in a few countries, and in Belize more widely, to inform sustainable use and kind of, quote, balanced use across the colored segments. There are these different zones that are managed a little bit independently and coordinated by the Belize Coastal Zone Management Authority. And working in the country, we developed the science to show where to invest in mangroves at the bottom and coral reefs, bottom right, to provide that coastal climate protection, to sustain key fisheries such as of spiny lobster and tourism and other big parts of the economy through. And I'll just show you the kind of things here again that the software allows you to do. Map out the places most critical for providing benefits for recreation and tourism or fisheries or habitat. Work with people to see, have people going out and monitoring the key habitats, such as shown here, and talking about where protections could be implemented beyond what's going on today. And this all led first of all by these two fabulous people, Katie Arkema on the left, working with the Natural Capital Project, and this amazing woman on the right, who led as head CEO of the Coastal Zone Management Authority, really drove the process over several years and involved the Inter-American Development Bank from the beginning, who's now scaling the work across all of the member countries that are along coastlines in Latin America. So that's greatly oversimplifying a process both of science and of engagement that's led to this outcome, building toward the mainstreaming. And IDB, by the way, now has launched a natural capital lab that's meant to help systematize this work across the pretty complex administration of the bank. So finally, what I want to get into is China, a place where I've been working for about 14 years and joined forces with Ian a few years back in something we'll show you in a second here. The amazing thing this will be my third and final example, and then we'll get into conversation. The amazing thing in China is how dramatically they're shifting government policy to support a real transformation from what everyone there will say was a period of tremendous and necessary and welcome growth in the period since the reform and opening up in the 1970s, but a model of growth that came at absolutely devastating cost. And what China has done now is added a fifth pillar to the constitution, an ecological pillar. And I'll just indicate a few of the ways in which they aim to transform to what they're calling an ecological civilization. So one of the ways is just inspired in part by the UK NEA, the National Ecosystem Assessment, developing their own ecosystem assessment, then implementing that in land zoning around the country, developing this ecological development strategy that's also being deployed across the country, and creating a new metric, gross ecosystem product, that I'll describe more fully. So here, just to show you the ecosystem assessment, everything happens at big scales in China, using a lot of remote sensing and an incredible number of ground survey sites, over 140,000, and using INVEST to model the provision of benefits from the ecosystems given their quality and extent on the ground to society. So this is just like a simplified overview of what they can map at the finest scale, the distribution, the quality, and the change in quality in ecosystems all across the country. And here we wrote up and published just some high-level views of the accounts, revealing food production, where it's done for something like 1,000 crop types, carbon sequestration, soil retention, sandstorm prevention, where you would focus investment to achieve these benefits, water retention services that in part regulate hydropower and enable hydropower throughout the year, irrigation, downstream water quality for cities, and then also flood mitigation. And here on this panel, we're showing flood mitigation by key wetland areas as well. And then biodiversity, I'll get into a little bit more in a minute. But overall, it shows the importance of ecosystem services in different places. And that's led to targeted land zoning, where here you see 49% of the land has been zoned for investment in natural capital. And there are basically three types of zones. And in any place, these three types include this sort of land prioritized for natural capital, land prioritized for agriculture, and then land prioritized for urban and more industrial development. And then what we saw in doing that assessment was that actually everything had improved from 2000 to 2010. There had been an improvement in ecosystem quality and the provision of most services, thanks to tremendous investments in China that started around the year 2000. And but what we found was that there was still an ongoing decline in biodiversity. So the country is committed to a greatly expanded system of protected areas with really interesting finance mechanisms and involvement of people who live in many of these places, that by 2030 will be protected in this PA system. So 30% of the land will be covered. And Zhu Weihua has led a lot of the work here, and many, many papers. I cite just a couple down there on the bottom right. And there are massive investments in restoration, looking at these low quality areas of grassland and forest that have been overgrazed and over harvested, degraded wetlands that are exposing China to tremendous increases in flood risk, soil erosion, desertification, abandoned mining sites, and other things. So they're mapping, and this is for the Yellow River, very extensive restoration projects that aim to protect first and then restore through natural processes of restoration, with ecosystem services as a major goal. And these projects are being carried out basically across China, and they've teed up a suite of the first ones that literally have detailed strategic plans behind them being implemented already. And there's 200 million people being paid to undertake this restoration. Another thing just to touch on briefly is they're taking all of this to the city level and teeing up, these are the priority 5 cities in China that will be deploying these kinds of approaches, both within the cities themselves, which often have actually quite a lot of green space still, remarkably, but then also looking at areas surrounding the cities and supplying cities, sometimes from far away, as I'll get into in a second here. Key benefits of air and water quality and obviously many other benefits. So here's the final thing I want to touch on, and that is gross ecosystem product. China was kind of waiting really for the European Union to put forth a green GDP, but that hasn't really come around. It's been, you will know better than I, the politics as well as the science of getting that delivered. So China then decided just to go ahead around 2013, 2014 with developing something to go alongside GDP, namely gross ecosystem product, that just like GDP, as Ian has helped explain to me, it's a complex, the economy is incredibly complex, but we can just systematically lay out all the different sectors and activities, the goods and services produced in an economy and their prices, and come up with a measure that helps guide a lot of decision-making, GDP. And doing something very similarly, we're developing GEP. This will have a little bit of overlap there with GDP, but that's easy to account for. And the idea is to measure this across China. And Ian and I teamed up with Ouyang, the leader of all of this, and many others. And Steve Pulaski in the US at Minnesota playing a key role as well. Bringing in data from across the country through that China ecosystem assessment that's ongoing, by the way. Every 5 years, they aim to generate that assessment, the data, and then running it through a lot of the invest models, improving the models further, and then laying out basically the contribution of ecosystems to the economy and society, informing these financial compensation mechanisms that are somewhat like PES schemes going on across the country, paying the 200 million people to restore, and then finally evaluating performance of policies and the leaders meant to implement those policies and deliver investments. And so the first place where we tested this out was in Qinghai province, that is most famous for being the headwaters of these 3 great rivers of China and indeed of Asia, with the Mekong there. And I won't go into detail now, but the idea was to show, okay, what and where is produced within Qinghai, benefiting people within Qinghai. A suite of services shown across here, the basic agricultural production, water and sandstorm and crop carbon and other benefits, but then mainly to look at who receives these benefits. So you see Qinghai in green in the middle, and then all of these downstream beneficiaries or downwind beneficiaries, or just down economy, otherwise downstream beneficiaries. So this approach is now being taken up all across the country in towns, counties, cities, and provinces, and deployed at a breathtaking pace. It's a grand experiment, and there's a huge transformation of the financial system behind it. So there's a lot more to talk about in that. And what I'll do, though, is just bring us to a close in saying that the aim in all of this is to make basically all of our science, interdisciplinary science, accessible ever more through being able to quantify these changes globally and at very fine scales. And here was part of an assessment for IPBES, just running a lot of different scenarios that show, for example, in the one here, that in the future at 2050, about 5 billion people could be at risk of increased water pollution, increased coastal climate risk, and lost crop production. So the aim in all of this, though, is to reach for, managing natural capital ever more prominently and well for prosperity. And I want to turn over to you now in the last minutes, just for any questions and especially comments and suggestions on where to head. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. That's absolutely fantastic. Wonderful talk, a real tour de force. I hate the fact that we can't give you a round of applause properly, so that's from me, but I'm sure everybody else is feeling exactly the same. I'll move straight to questions because we have got quite a few. Thank you all for expressing your positive response to this. So a number of questions have been put into the chat, and the first one that we received was from Jasper Mayer, and I was going to ask them to put their video on and ask their question if they could. Let's just see if that works. Is that something that could be done? Oh, great. Yes. Lovely.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, yeah, for this very nice and really impressive decades on research. So I would be interested in your experience. Where do you see the most pressing research needs we as environmental economists need to deliver to be able to mainstream natural capital values really at large scale for countries or regions like Europe?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that great question. And I feel I should look to the young people like you for the answers there. I'll mention a couple of things that are priorities, but I'd love to just keep going with the ideas. So I'll be very quick now. One is in health. Everybody cares about health. The pandemic has elevated health in ways that can hardly be overstated. And the whole symbiotic mental and physical dimensions of health, we can say with ever more evidence, relate intimately to our experience of nature and how we treat nature. So that is a top priority, and a frontier where there's a lot on the cusp that we could really deliver in the near term, a lot of new science and understanding. A second, and this will be the last one I mention actually, because I'd love to carry on with the conversation, but another key area is just to integrate ever more and illuminate the economic values and ways of realizing those values through changes in policy or finance or management and practice. There's so much to do in trying to enable a human being out working the land or the waters to make a living, to enable them to realize these benefits, and looking along that whole chain. Ian had a fabulous paper recently, and a bunch of scientists and postdocs led by Lisa Mandel had a similar fabulous paper. Actually, Ian, yours was with Georgina, kind of laying out some of those frontiers. So I encourage looking at those. I think they were both in Nature Sustainability that came out a few months ago. Kai Chan also had a neat one that I recommend looking at, maybe also in the same journal, but laying out some of those frontiers to drive more investment from these development banks, but also their public-facing entities, private entities, private sector investments. So let's turn to other questions.
Yeah, so the next one was from Adam. Here we go. Yep, Adam. Are you able to?
Hi, sorry, it's Adam. Yeah, I am.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's my personal one. I'm not allowed to use my work laptop for this sort of thing, so it comes a bit out. Hi, thanks very much for the talk. It was fantastic. And so my question was around pet schemes. You mentioned a lot of water schemes, and I always find them really kind of neat and impressive. But I was wondering if you had any kind of rules of thumb for dealing with aspects of fairness. I know a number of them sort of fell down on those sorts of issues, and understanding how you balance sort of the pragmatism of getting the work done and paying where it's appropriate against basically paying polluters where you probably shouldn't be doing, and where you should be regulating and potentially actually taxing those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely have to use both at some point in the system, or you run into the problems that you're implying here. And yet at the beginning, there's a philosophy in many places of just making this more inclusive and natural. And Costa Rica basically welcomed everybody into their system and basically continues to do so. So there are differences in view that are somewhat culturally embedded that I think need accounting for. And what I would suggest, given the time, is looking at, there's some recent papers led by Kai Chan on this, and also by Jim Salzman, another collaborator in this. And then there's a lot of work that's been done in Australia using reverse auction mechanisms. There are quite a lot of sophisticated mechanisms that I imagine you know about, but some new work there showing how you can really try to account for what some of the fairness issues and ensuring you're not kind of paying people to do stuff they would do otherwise, and avoiding some of the other pitfalls that can come about and make PES schemes less efficient. But there is that interesting difference in philosophy and a desire just to get them going more, even if they're not perfectly efficient. So all of that bears a lot more work, and I appreciate your bringing up the question. Thank you.
So I should try to thank Ian for advertising this externally. Thank you. From the Office of Mission Statement. Thanks.
No, thank you all very much for coming. We're going to carry on. I'm not actually sure exactly what's going to happen on the hour. Hopefully it's not going to shut down. But if that's all right with you, Gretchen, we'll just carry on for a bit longer.
Please, yes.
Okay, cool. Next one I've got is Gemma.
Hi Gretchen, thank you so much for your talk. My question was, how do you make sure that the uncertainties in the invest models are effectively communicated to decision makers?
Thank you. That is one of the things that worries us at night. So you've hit on a key topic. And I would say it's one where we have to, a lot of improvement yet to make. So we'd welcome now or later any suggestions from you. But basically, we run a lot of scenarios and try to conduct sensitivity analyses to illuminate kind of the range of outcomes, and the sensitivity of the models to different assumptions, and depending on what the model is and on the data quality for the place. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat at the worst time, but so we try to do a lot of analysis, and what I presented was a much simplified view of how things are presented. We also work, this is where it's not that fast, and I worry about the risks of accelerating, even though we need to accelerate, but most of our engagements take years. And so we do really dig into the uncertainties and play around with different data and different assumptions and different ways of framing questions and possible policy changes that help ensure that we are incorporating the uncertainties as best we can and effectively. But that's an arena that as this gets taken up by people where we're not interacting directly, and more it is being taken up that way, which is what we'd like. And Swiss Re actually announced a new risk index about a month ago that they're deploying that uses the platform. I'm not sure how well uncertainty will be taken up, and I obviously that's what they're trying to measure in part in their risk index, but that is a key topic for us and for the community broadly to advance in. Thank you for that good question.
Lovely, great. Next one up is Bart. Bart Immerziel.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Gretchen. Very nice talk. I have a question about stakeholder involvement. So what have you found to be effective ways to involve and engage and keep engaging your stakeholders throughout the project? And what are big challenges you see there actually?
Okay, there you've hit on another enormous topic, and I would say a couple of things, and I'm going to contextualize this a little bit with the attention that I'm sure you're aware of coming up in the US through some of the racial violence and the growing awareness and movement, though it's very complex here, as I'm sure you're aware, around the structural inequities. So I bring that up because in the vision here, there's a lot of spirit in many countries, and certainly among many of the, hopefully all of the scientists involved in this, to drive ever more inclusion. And that is one of the challenges, is how to open up in the most inclusive way And I'll give an example just locally from the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, where we need to improve. So I'm basically saying we try our best, but there are a lot of ways in which we need to improve this kind of work. And so the point of the study was to illuminate vulnerability to sea level rise and other impacts of climate change, and then the role in which that nature-based solutions and other kinds of investments in nature could help reduce that vulnerability. So we had an explicit focus on the most vulnerable communities and people around the Bay Area. And we worked with stakeholders who were very invested in reducing, in illuminating those vulnerabilities and reducing them. But it was still tricky. We worked with county officials that had certain hours in which they'd work. And those hours were working hours, which made sense. But that really limited the number and kind of range of people we could involve, because many people can't break free from their Monday through Friday 8 to 5 jobs. So we had, we aimed for high diversity and inclusion, but we were limited by process matters that always come up, where you need to be working with officials who will help implement any policy change. And then in some countries, I'm going to take, so I feel we ran a decent process, but basically what we should have done is worked within the official policy sort of making process, but maybe also engaged people outside of that process in a more informal one that we could have run ourselves as more academics separately. That's just one little example. Another case that comes up for us a lot is whether and how to work in countries with human rights abuses. So we have worked extensively in places like Myanmar and places that are called out like China for human rights abuses, and places like the US that ought to be called out more for the issues that go on here. But the commitment we have is to improvement and to engaging anywhere, basically. It's not like we're working for the well-being of people, and we, in Myanmar, for example, we're able to get a lot of representation there with our key partner, World Wildlife Fund, from communities. And this was done before the Rohingya crisis, actually. We haven't been working there subsequently and haven't had the opportunity. But the aim is to work everywhere. So with respect to the ethics involved there, it's, aiming to drive work that is addressing problems that are matters of inclusive, sustainable, and green development. And in some of the places, it is much more challenging than others to get all of the stakeholders one would want. But I think it's mostly through these separate processes of gaining information and feedback on plans that we can do it. So that addresses one part of what is a really complex arena. And if you all have papers or other ways in which you could share with me what you're up to or thinking, or think we ought to be made more aware of, I'd really welcome your being in touch. Thank you.
Great. I think we're probably just going to push it for maybe a couple more questions, and I don't want to intrude too much on your time. So I'm going to go to Bowen next.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. You mentioned a little bit about using AI and remote sensing in terms of help better understanding the natural capital value. I was wondering, do you see any both challenges and opportunities in terms of that regard?
Bowen, thank you for that fabulous question. So here's where I'm probably the most ignorant as to what the potential is, but I'm very excited about the potential. We've been doing a variety of things, mostly using AI to refine what we see on Earth's surface and how we interpret what's there. So I'll mention a couple of exciting efforts that are underway. One led by Lisa Mandel is focused on identifying dams, even the smallest dams and human-made impoundments, because it turns out most dams are probably illegal, and so they're not registered anywhere officially. And it's very hard to look up, like the databases on dams are highly, highly incomplete. And yet these dams are everywhere and they have a tremendous influence on water flow. And we need to account for them in the modeling. So using AI, we've now basically mapped, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of dams. It might be more than thousands, actually. It's a project that's just finishing around now, so I'll have to get the latest, and I could put you in touch. So that was really interesting and useful. Another, I'll give two more examples. The second one is in the context of fire risk management. And this project started by one of my students, Christopher Anderson, who's actually now spinning off a company called SALO. You could look it up, SALO. And they use AI to map and quantify forest health. First, across California, they've identified every tree in California, and using a variety of sensors are able to quantify the risk of burning of a tree based on the tree's apparent health and water content, its species, and its context, its location, and what's going on around it. And they're mapping this for using a lot of AI algorithms, the state of California, and that's now informing a lot of investment to reduce fire risk by restoring forests to what it used to be prior to fire suppression and prior to the degree possible the severe droughts that we're experiencing in California. So that's a second example, and they aim to take that to many other places that face extreme fire risk. A third example, also actually being led by Christopher Anderson, in a paper that will be ready to submit soon, and I could possibly share if you're interested. It looks at disease risk. So we've gotten working with a few key people, Erin Mordecai and Desiree Lebeau and others in health. We've looked at mosquito-borne diseases, so 13 different diseases like malaria, dengue, Zika, chikungunya, and others across the Americas. And also using AI algorithms, tried to map the mosquitoes to their climate zones and the particular habitats that they favor. And then looking at where people are and just illuminating what, and also looking at, we know something about the change in distribution and the projected changes in distribution of both people and these mosquitoes that carry the disease and the likelihood of transmitting disease. So that's a third arena where I think, again, amplifying that point on health being an area where if we can help decision makers see all that's at stake and how investing in health requires investing in ecosystems, in protecting and keeping people out of some ecosystems and in improving ecosystem condition to benefit health, it will benefit not only people, but many aspects of nature that we want to protect for a multitude of reasons, going back to the beginning when thinking about Georgina's role in awakening us all to the importance ethically and even spiritually and in other ways, as well as pragmatic ways for investing in nature. So thanks for the good question, and I'd love to hear what you get up to in that area.
Thank you so much.
Well, Gretchen, I thought that was a lovely response, actually, to probably wrap this up with. We've trespassed a lot on your time. I really appreciate it. I want to thank you very, very much for what you've done for us here. You have brought the biggest crowd that we've had yet out, and I really appreciate that. I will just before I totally finish, I will just so I don't get told off. I will just share one.
This is really nice. While you're sharing, it's like what we would do if we could be in person is just hang out a bit afterwards. So I want to thank everybody for spending a bit of time with me. And now, Ian, you should announce the next people. Ooh, I would like to register myself.
Well, that you can, because you know, we're opening these talks up to absolutely everyone now, and we would be delighted to see everybody again. We'd be keen for you to pass on information about the fantastic people that are coming to talk to us. You can see we've got some great talks coming up, one more before Christmas and two early in the new year. So please do register for those. It's all free, and you'd be very, very welcome to come along. So I just want to properly finish by thanking Gretchen very, very much for a fabulous talk. Your work really is world leading. And although you're extremely generous to everybody that works with you, and I'm definitely a case in point with regard to that, the reality is that none of this would have happened without your insight and leadership for what is now nearly 3 decades. And it's a fantastic achievement that you've brought consideration of the natural environment out of being a minority sport interest of a few tree hugging conservationists to now being seen as utterly vital to the continuance of the economy, and therefore a major target of action by policymakers right around the world. And that is very considerably down to you and the work that you've done. So I appreciate greatly that you've taken time to come talk to us. Thank you, and just want to also thank everybody else that's come along. Really appreciate
Ian, you're a
it.
true friend. Thank you for saying all that gross exaggeration, but
No, it's not.
I'm really grateful to you, and I'm so happy to have had the chance to interact this way, and look forward to a time when we can be in person again. And please be in touch with the work you're leading. I'm very, very inspired by all that's going on at Exeter and around, and all the work you're doing and engaging across the UK and world. So thank you. And
you'll find it difficult to
till
shake us
next
off,
time.
put it that way. So thank you.